Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video, I'm going to be reviewing Shazam, the newest movie from DC Comics. Now, I've always liked the Shazam character, otherwise known as Captain Marvel, be it his appearances in the comics or in the animated series like Justice League. The idea of a kid who gains ultimate power and becomes a superhero with an adult body is a fun concept and has been used in some fun ways. So when I heard that it would be getting a movie, I was interested. Although the movies in the DCEU have had their ups and downs to say the least, the promotional material featuring Zachary Levi as Shazam and the trailers for the movie all appeared to have gotten the tone right for the film. So going into the movie, I was excited. And now upon seeing the movie, I would have to say that it was a lot of fun. So let me first get into the things that I liked about this film. Now of course, first off, I have to talk about Zachary Levi as Shazam. His performance here was great and the absolute highlight of the film. He had a ton of charisma in this role and was able to perfectly pull off the idea of a kid who was in the body of an adult. His performance was very reminiscent of Tom Hanks in the movie Big, and there were some other references to that film along the way. However, because this film is more comedic, Zachary Levi gave an even funnier performance, and something that really made this film shine. And another big aspect of that would have to be his friendship with his foster brother, Freddie Freeman, played by Jack Dylan Grazer. And the two of them had a lot of chemistry, first beginning with the two of them meeting as children, while Billy Batson was played by Asher Angel, who I think did a good job in this film as well. But once Billy finally gets his power, that's really where the friendship between the two of them escalates to a new level, as Freddie basically serves as a manager for Billy. And as we see in the trailers, the two of them go around as Billy learns more about his powers, with a lot of funny consequences, such as when the two of them help to stop criminals. And that's really the biggest strength of this film, as it's more comedic in tone than all of the previous DC movies, feeling more along the lines of a film like Deadpool, with a lot of meta commentary on the superhero genre, especially involving the DC characters. And with a character like Shazam, that's the kind of tone that I think fits perfectly. Although it isn't all fun and games, as there is a villain to this film, Dr. Sivana, played by Mark Strong. And I've been a fan of Mark Strong as an actor for a while now, as I think he's rather underrated. And as many know, he actually played Sinestro in the failed Green Lantern movie. So it's nice to see him shine once again as a villain in a far better movie. And going into this film, I assumed that Dr. Sivana would probably get minor development, and that might be a weak part of the film itself. However, I was pleasantly surprised that they actually gave him a fleshed out backstory and motivations that the audience can understand. He isn't just the typical cardboard cutout villain that we've seen in many comic book movies in the past, and he has a real reason for why he's opposing Shazam in this film. Although there are other villains in this film who he gets support from, with those being the 7 deadly sins. And that was something else I was pleasantly surprised to see in this film, as I assumed that they would serve mostly as an Easter egg. However, they end up being a focal part of the film. And it's really with their scenes and their inclusion in the film that you can tell that Shazam was directed by a former horror director, as David F. Sandberg, the director of such horror films as Lights Out, also directed this film. And although this film is primarily comedic in tone, he was able to balance a good mix of comedy and horror throughout, creating some scary and tension-filled scenes, as well as including some jump scares here and there. And I think that Sandberg does a really good job of balancing and transitioning between the tones, although maybe there are a couple points in the film where it clashes a little bit. I've heard some people refer to this as kind of a tonal reboot of the DCEU, and I think that makes sense considering this is night and day compared to the previous Zack Snyder films. And I think it works here because if you read the comics and you watch the animated series, then you would know that DC has a tendency to shift between comedy and more dark, serious tones. But speaking of the comics and the cartoons, this film definitely embraces the campy source material that it's based on. Even though the story itself is more grounded in reality than many other comic book stories, taking place in the real city of Philadelphia, there's still the magic and the super suit, and talking about superpowers, and how a hero and a villain are supposed to be, with Dr. Sivana being pretty clearly referred to as a supervillain, and there is the mystical backstory that Shazam fans will know. Shazam at times will say corny things like holy moly, and of course there is the wizard that he gets his power from, also named Shazam, who is played by Jimon Hanzo, who is also pretty funny here. And in 2019, after all the years of downplaying the source material in these superhero movies, it's nice to see DC going in the direction of actually embracing the source material that made people fans of characters like Shazam in the first place. And when it comes to Billy Batson and his Foster family, they go even further with the source material than I would have expected, especially when it comes to the awesome third act of this film that has a really fun final fight. But one of the things I feel like really sets this film apart from your typical blockbuster action movie is the fact that this film actually does have a heart to it. Not only with Billy and his Foster family, but we really get in depth about Billy's backstory and how he ended up in the situation he ends up in. And there's some big revelations and emotional moments that come as a result. So I think audiences will appreciate that about this film. In addition to that, there are a number of cameos and Easter eggs that comic book fans will no doubt pick up on during the film, such as references to other superheroes from DC and other characters from the Shazam comics, including a major character from Shazam early in the film, and then another big character towards the end. And I also thought the musical score itself was pretty good, complementing both the comedic and horror scenes of the film and adding to the meta humor. As for any cons with the film, some of the acting can be rough at times, be it from the child actors and even some of the adults. Although I think that the dialogue contributes to that because sometimes it could be rather exposition heavy and clunky, which even great actors can have problems with. And at times, the CGI during the film isn't really the best. I'm used to all of these superhero films having an overabundance of CGI, but there's a few scenes in the film where it just doesn't look good at all, and can kind of take you out of the experience. Aside from all of this, the credits themselves are pretty fun, doing something rather stylistically similar to what we saw with Deadpool, and as is the convention now with comic book movies, we do get two credit scenes. One in the middle of the credits that seems to be setting up something in the future, and a second one at the very end, which I would say is pretty much skippable. So overall, Shazam is a fun superhero comedy with a lot of humor and an incredibly fitting performance by Zachary Levi in the starring role. It's not perfect and the acting isn't always the best, but it's a movie with heart and probably the most fun entry into the DCEU yet. I'm not quite sure I'd say it's as good as Aquaman or Wonder Woman, however it's a strong first solo film for Shazam and one I'd recommend to fans of DC and comic books in general, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with Shazam in the future. I'm going to give Shazam a 7 out of 10. So have you guys seen Shazam yet, or are you planning to? Let me know down below. Also, if you're new to this channel, then don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications so that you can see all of my videos right away when they come out. And make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.